111. What the? Michael's jaw dropped in disbelief as soon as he stepped into the corridor. The others quickly gathered beside him. Each of them had a similar reaction to what they saw. The basement beneath the Overlord estate was a laboratory. A vast laboratory, perhaps even larger than the mansion grounds above. Rows of glass tubes stood tall in neat lines, each one big enough to hold a person, though whatever things had been inside them were not people. And they were long gone. Some tubes were smeared with strange iridescent stains as if something had melted against the glass. There were also separate rooms with reinforced iron bars resembling prison cells. And judging by the claw marks on the interior walls, these cells were meant to hold something captive that shouldn't have escaped this place. Kong breathed in sharply. They were experimenting on spirit beasts here. Of course, it was so obvious now. A few days ago, when Michael and Lily had followed a police officer into a back alley, they found numerous documents about many secret projects conducted by the Overlord. One of those projects was constructing a network of underground tunnels beneath the city. In those documents, Michael had also found rough blueprints of some laboratory facilities. Back then, he had no idea what relevance those blueprints held, so he ignored them. But now, in hindsight, he realized he should have guessed the existence of something as cliché as a lab for running experiments on monsters. Shaking his head, Michael stepped further into the lab. It was a large facility, and exploring every inch of it would take them hours. Alexia walked up to a control panel and ran some fingers along its dust-coated surface. Then, her hands brushed against something else. A leather-bound journal. I found something, Alexia announced for everyone to hear before picking up the journal and tossing it in Michael's direction. Michael caught it with one hand and immediately began reading through its contents. Entry 23. Subject 09 has begun self-cannibalizing. The Overlord insists we proceed. If we can't stabilize the beast, he demands we terminate it and salvage its core. However, he refuses to stop the experiment. Entry 42. The containment breach was inevitable. Subject 12's growth rate exceeds projections. 3 handlers were lost. The Overlord authorized termination, but the creature, it learned to escape. Tragic as it is, it's a sign of success. The beasts can learn, and so, they can be controlled. Entry 103. The results were far better than any of us could have expected. Subject Omega and Alpha passed the test. The experiment is deemed successful. After going through a few more entries, Michael let out a shaky breath. He wasn't stupid. He had expected something like this, but not this. Not on this scale. Michael knew the Overlord had somehow been controlling the spirit beasts. He was the one orchestrating all those attacks, after all. But he thought it was because the Overlord had an artifact or a high-tier card, something powerful but conventional. But this was something far worse. The Overlord hadn't enthralled the beasts with magic or some ancient relic. He had used technology. His scientists had created an orb-shaped device, small enough to be implanted in young spirit beasts. Once implanted, that orb would fuse with the creature's mind, warping its thoughts, reshaping its instincts. It wasn't simple control, it was complete and utter domination. Spirit beasts were corrupted creatures from the spirit realm, and they were all driven by their insatiable hunger. It was in their instincts to devour the living. They craved the essence of pure beings. They desired human flesh. But with this device, the Overlord had rewritten that instinct and reshaped their thoughts. The beasts were no longer just mindless predators. They were his obedient puppets. Now, this kind of power wasn't unheard of. There were a few awakened in the world capable of enthralling spirit beasts with their innate powers. These people were known as beast tamers. They weren't very common. Only around 10 of them were known in the entire world, and none of them exceeded A rank. Yet even the weakest among them were highly sought after by clans and organizations. Some of the most powerful factions in the world fought to recruit them. Because beast tamers were valuable. Why? The answer was simple. In higher ranks, spirit beasts naturally outclassed humans of the same level. A greater spirit beast, for example, was the equivalent of an A rank awakened in terms of raw essence and power. But even then, the beasts would almost always be stronger if we're strictly talking about attack potency and overall strength. The only reason humans could stand against those abominations was because of their high adaptability and versatility. After all, even a low-ranked awakened could use 10 cards that'd grant them different kinds of powers. And while spirit beasts had monstrous strength and unnatural durability, their abilities were limited. Most lower-ranked beasts didn't possess any magical powers. They had supernatural physical traits, but that was it. As they grew stronger, they developed more abilities. But even greater spirits, though powerful, lacked the sheer versatility that an awakened could gain by using different types of cards. That was the key advantage humans had. Now, imagine an awakened, someone who could use cards to wield unique abilities, while also commanding a legion of spirit beasts in battle. That was why beast tamers were so highly regarded. But they weren't invincible. Since none of the living beast tamers were above A rank, the most powerful beast they could tame was a greater spirit. So, even the strongest among them wouldn't last much longer against a S-rank hunter. And that was precisely why the Overlord experiment was so terrifying. Because unlike the natural-born beast tamers, whose powers had limits, he had created something without any. Michael continued reading the journal. Entry 116. Subject -19 shows signs of aggression. The orb has fused too deeply with it. The Overlord insists we increase the dose of the stabilizing serum. The beast is adapting. Entry 123. We've confirmed the orb's secondary function. It can accelerate the spirit beast's natural evolution, causing them to grow and learn at an exceptional rate. This is no longer about controlling them. It's about creating new kinds of monsters. Perfect weapons for the Overlord army. Michael felt a cold chill seep into his bones. These weren't just experiments. They were revolutions. The Overlord wasn't simply taming spirit beasts, he was making something new. Something far worse. That was what made his experiments truly terrifying. A normal beast tamer could only control creatures up to their own rank. The moment a spirit beast grew too powerful, it would break free and turn on its master. But the Overlord had found a way around that. By implanting the orb in an infant spirit beast, he could bind its mind from the very start. And as the creature grew, becoming a greater or ancient, maybe even an unholy beast, it would never escape the Overlord control. It didn't matter how strong it became. The Overlord would always have his leash around the beast's throat. Not even natural beast tamers could do that. Because their power had limits. The Overlord didn't, since he wasn't using any power at all. He was using technology. Then there was also the matter of intelligence. Spirit beasts weren't truly intelligent, not like humans. They were driven by instinct, by hunger, by an overwhelming desire to consume and destroy. Only the strongest, ancient or elder spirits, developed intelligence, and even then, it was limited. Some unholy beasts could even speak, but they were still ruled by their bloodlust. But the Overlord, he had changed that. His technology didn't just bend their minds. It evolved them. It gave them intelligence and let them keep it. And worse, it allowed him to control it. He wasn't just creating monsters. He was breeding soldiers, creatures smart enough to understand his complex orders, but stripped of the will to resist him. Beasts powerful enough to tear cities apart, yet bound to his command. This wasn't just a war machine. This was humanity's first true weapon of mass destruction since the nuclear bomb. Michael shuddered, and judging by the heavy silence that followed, he wasn't the only one who had that thought. From behind, Lily finally spoke, her voice low, almost trembling. This isn't just about control, she whispered. The Overlord wants to breed an army. One that never stops growing. Never stops evolving. An army only under his control. A weight settled over them. The kind that made breathing feel difficult. Michael exhaled, then clenched his fists. We need to inform the Academy about this as soon as possible. We need to stop him, he said. He tried to keep his voice firm despite the dread curling in his gut. We can't let the Overlord create more of these things. This kind of power shouldn't be in the hands of someone like him. Alexia let out an exasperated sigh. Yeah, Mikey, that's real heroic. Very brave. I'm so moved. Michael frowned. Alexia, what? No, seriously, bravo. She gave a slow, sarcastic clap. But I think we're skipping over a pretty major issue here. Everyone turned to her, confused. She rolled her sightless eyes like she was babysitting a bunch of dim-witted children. Guys, she pointed at the empty tubes. The vacant cells. The shattered glass. It's clear that the big bad Overlord is making an army of super monsters. Cool. Her expression darkened. But where the fuck are they? Before anyone could answer, a low hum filled the room. A projector flickered to life, and a bright blue hologram crackled into existence at the center of the lab. It was the Overlord, or, well, his live holographic video projection. Wearing a tailored black suit that matched the color of his hair, he was sitting in a throne-like chair, one leg crossed over the other, and an amused smile plastered on his face. Cadets, his voice was smooth as it resonated from the speakers embedded in the facility. I want to applaud your persistence, but really, I'd much rather see you die. Alexia scowled. Come down here and say that, dumbface. The Overlord ignored her. You haven't seen my creations yet, have you? They're crude for now, but I love them like my children. Michael calmly stepped forward. Where are they? Lord Everin tilted his head slightly. Oh, I've already unleashed them onto the city. Well, most of them. Michael's blood ran cold. You sick bastard, he roared. Why are you slaughtering your own people? You should be protecting your citizens, not be the reason they die. Discover more stories at my virtual library empire. The Overlord didn't respond immediately. He just kept staring at Michael. His expression was unreadable as he let out a wistful sigh. I don't expect you to understand, child, he said. After all, what do you even know about the world we live in? Nothing, you know nothing. Michael blinked, bewildered. What the hell are you talking about? I know killing innocent people is an unforgivable transgression. Oh, and you think the man you're working for is so pure? The Overlord raised his voice. You think he hasn't killed anyone? I'll have you know, he's just as much of a criminal as me, if not more. Michael frowned. Huh, what man? We're not working for anyone. Silence. The Overlord tone sharpened. You think I'm a fool, you peasant. I know the High Priest put you up to this. He told you about my lab, didn't he? He gave you the intel, didn't he? Alexia turned toward Lily, utterly baffled. Is this guy insane? Michael was about to say something, but before he could, the Overlord started speaking again. It doesn't matter, Lord Everin said as he snapped his fingers. The High Priest will die today. And so will you. As soon as that happened, Lily's eyes widened. Guys, it's a trap. However, before anyone could register her warning, the lab rumbled violently. Behind the hologram, a massive titanium door groaned open, revealing a dark, yawning tunnel. At the same moment, heavy shutters slammed down over every exit, locking the group inside. Kong snarled. Of course, this place was a trap. The Overlord chuckled. Be honored, peasants. You're in the presence of my two most powerful children. I take pride in these two, Subject Alpha and Omega. The tunnel began to echo. There were a lot of different noises. Scraping, clicking, and a wet, guttural growl that reverberated through their bones. The Overlord snapped his fingers one more time. Oh, and don't even think about escaping, cadets. Even a greater spirit beast couldn't claw its way out of this fortified facility. Now, goodbye, and may the Mother of Death have mercy on your souls. His laughter rang through the speakers once again before his hologram fizzled out. And then, something stepped out of the tunnel. A hulking mass of grotesque flesh. It was moving on all fours, and its elongated spine was arched unnaturally high. Dark skin stretched taut over its rippling muscle, pulsating with unnatural veins that glowed faintly beneath the creature's flesh. Jagged bone jutted from its back like sharp spikes. Its fingers, if they could be called that, ended in elongated, hooked talons that scraped against the floor, carving deep gouges into the metallic ground. Then it lifted its head. 6 milky eyes rolled in different directions before snapping forward, locking onto them with mindless hunger. A thick, black tongue slithered between its jagged fangs, dripping acidic saliva that hissed and sizzled where it landed. And then the beast growled again. It was a deafening sound that clawed at their ears and rattled in their skulls, instilling a primal sense of terror. The sound alone made Alexia stumble back as her face twisted in pain. Michael gritted his teeth, fighting the nausea curling in his stomach. And then the second beast emerged from the tunnel. It was smaller, but sleeker. Built for speed, these things didn't move like animals. They moved like executioners. Kong activated his origin card, looking slightly panicked instead of condescending for the first time. We need a plan. Now. Michael's grip tightened around his longsword. The shutters were sealed. There was no escape. They had no choice. All they could do was fight. The first beast let out an ear-piercing screech, while the second one pounced forward, closing the distance in a blink. And then, all hell broke loose. 112. It was early in the night. Streetlights buzzed softly, illuminating the empty sidewalls. Neon signs flickered over the shops. Cars rumbled along the roads, their headlights cutting through the darkness. It was a quiet night. As peaceful as any other. But peace was scarce these days in Ishtara. In a small diner, a waitress leaned on the counter, lazily scrolling through her phone. A young couple walked hand in hand past a convenience store, laughing at an inside joke. Somewhere in an apartment complex, a man yawned as he locked his door for the night, ready to sleep in his comfortable bed. Then, the first scream broke the silence. It came from a dimly lit alley, where a man had been walking alone. He didn't even get the chance to run before something pulled him into the darkness. And then the ground shook. Across the city, sewer grates rattled. Manhole covers trembled, cracks formed in the pavement, thin at first, then splitting wide. Then, they came. From the underground tunnels, from the secret passageways beneath the city, creatures slithered and crawled into the open. Their bodies were grotesque, bloated and twisted. Their skin was leathery and slick, stretched tight over their swollen bodies covered in pulsating veins. They had too many limbs, some were thick and root-like arms that slammed against the ground, others were long and whip-like tentacles that writhed in the air. Their faces, if they could be called that, were gaping maws lined with jagged teeth. Thick, black, acidic saliva continued to drip from their mouths. Their breaths were heavy and wet and foul. And then they attacked. One of the creatures slammed into a parked car and crushed it like tin. Its tentacles lashed out, wrapping around a man who was nearby. The man tried to run, but he was too slow. He tried to scream and struggle, but he was yanked off the ground in an instant. The monster's mouth opened wider before swallowing the man whole, eating him alive in an instant. Further down the street, another creature burst through a convenience store window. The cashier barely had time to raise his hands before a thick tendril wrapped around his waist and pulled him over the counter. Another creature lunged at a passing taxi, its jagged claws tearing through the windshield. The driver couldn't even muster a scream before the creature bit off his head and dragged his dead body out, painting the hood of the car with blood. In another corner of the city, a group of teenagers outside a late-night arcade turned at the sound of heavy footsteps, only to see a monster growling back at them. They screamed in terror and ran. But one of the teen boys tripped in panic. He tried to get up and run again, crying out for his friends to help him, but the creature's tentacle immediately pierced his chest. He was killed on the spot. Soon, similar scenes were happening all around the city. Everything descended into chaos. Alarms blared, people shouted, cars crashed. Windows shattered as monstrous silhouettes burst into homes, dragging out their screaming victims. The city was no longer a city. It was a feeding ground. And the night had only just begun. Back at the Church of the Mother of Mercy, High Priest Bowden was standing in his chambers, gazing out the window, taking in the view of the city. This was his routine, since his church office was on a high floor, had a perfect view of the cityscape at night. Stay connected via my virtual library empire. Before heading home each evening, he would always take a few moments to admire the sight, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with it. However, tonight wasn't anything like the other nights. There was no peace, and the quiet had long been shattered by the disturbing sounds of the monsters growling and the hopeless screams of the people. Bowden stiffened as another high-pitched shriek tore through the night, followed by a bright explosion across the road. A monster must have ruptured a gas pipeline in one of the houses, causing that fiery blast that set fire to the surrounding buildings. On the streets below, he saw people running and crying in terror as they were being chased by twisted abominations. In the distance, he noticed a group of people trying to barricade themselves inside a small shop, slamming the doors shut just as another monster barreled down the street. But the abomination slammed its body against the storefront, shattering glass and splintering wood before entering the shop. The group had no way to escape, so a few of them grabbed whatever they could and bravely tried to fight the monster. But they weren't going to last long. Not against these things. The creature lashed out with its rope-like tentacle and grabbed a man by his neck, lifting him up in the air and strangling him until he dropped dead. In the very next second, the creature pounced forward and swallowed a woman whole, her horrified scream cutting off as she disappeared into its maw. Soon, everyone else in that shop was brutally butchered as well. Fires spread rapidly throughout the city as more explosions erupted. Smoke rose into the sky, choking out the stars. The once serene cityscape had become a nightmare. High Priest Bowden gripped the windowsill so tightly that his knuckles turned white. What the hell? He muttered to himself. What had Everin done? This wasn't the plan. Why has he unleashed his beasts into the city? What was he thinking? That fucking idiot. Bowden gritted his teeth and turned around. The guards stationed outside bowed in reverence as he exited his chamber. Ignoring them, he walked up to the elevator, stepped inside it, and pressed the button for the lowest floor. As the elevator doors slid shut, Bowden ran a hand through his graying hair. His mind was racing as he thought about what was happening. Everin had gone insane. What he had done was pure madness. Why would he release the beasts in the city so soon? Now, because of that bastard, Bowden would have to hurry as well. He shook his head, cursing silently. A soft chime rang as the elevator came to a stop. The metallic doors opened with a quiet hiss, revealing the lowest floor under the grounds of the church. And it was nothing like what any of the worshippers could have expected. Below the church, there was a vast laboratory, almost identical to the one below the Overlord Mansion, albeit much bigger and better equipped. The air here was cold and sterile. Yet beneath the scent of metal and disinfectant, there was something else. Something rotten. Row upon row of large glass tubes stretched out before him, each one containing a twisted abomination. Yes, under the church were monsters, twisted and grotesque, similar to the ones running rampant in the city right now. Beyond the glass tubes were holding cells. Thick iron bars made of reinforced steel created a prison that held even more creatures, some massive, others lean and gaunt. As soon as Bowden entered the laboratory, most of the monsters snapped in his direction, their glowing eyes tracking his every step. The high priest exhaled sharply and strode forward, paying no mind to the abominations surrounding him. The head researcher, a thin man in a lab coat, turned as Bowden approached. His face was pale, his glasses slightly askew. Standing right next to him was a tall man with a dark cloak draped over his shoulders, his face hidden under a hood. This man was the high priest's informant. High priest, the researcher stammered. I assume you've seen. Of course, I've seen it. Bowden cut him off, his voice tight with frustration. Everin let the damn things loose. He has lost his damn mind. Why the fuck would he do something like that? The researcher swallowed. He looked scared out of his mind. Thankfully, the informant stepped forward to answer the question. According to my sources, the Overlord Mansion was raided by the cadets. It happened just half an hour ago, he said. I was about to come to you, but I don't need excuses, Bowden snapped. He turned to the rows of imprisoned creatures and clenched his fists. If the cadets had raided the Overlord Mansion, that could mean only one thing. The thief that had stolen the data of their dealings had sold his information to the cadets. And the cadets decided to pay the Overlord a visit. Bowden facepalmed. Things were spiraling out of control faster than he had anticipated. Everin must have panicked when the cadets came after him. But releasing the beasts wasn't just reckless, it was desperate. That bastard unleashed chaos to cover his own escape. Coward. The high priest exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. This wasn't the time to lose his temper. He needed to act. Bowden turned back to the informant. Where is Everin now? The cloaked man hesitated for a moment before answering. Unknown. But if I had to guess, he's either trying to flee the city or, Bowden narrowed his eyes. Or he's dead. Silence filled the laboratory. Even the researcher looked up, startled. Bowden's expression darkened. It made sense. Everin was strong. He was a B rank awakened. But his strength wasn't anything exceptional. Meanwhile, since those cadets were sent by the Apex Academy, they must have been worth their salt. A group of them could definitely take down a B rank awakened. But then, a sudden smile crept onto his wrinkled face. No, this is good. Is it? The informant asked, confused. Yes, Bowden nodded. If the Overlord is dead, then there is no one to challenge our claims. We could simply pin this all on the government and no one would oppose us. He then turned to the head researcher and gave him a pat on the shoulder. Prepare to release the beasts. We'll go ahead with the plan and make use of the chaos Everin has created. The researcher widened his eyes. But instead of saying anything, he nodded and quickly rushed to follow the orders. The informant, however, remained still. And what about the cadets? Bowden clicked his tongue. We'll deal with them after all this. Who knows, maybe they'll die on their own in all the chaos. The informant lingered for a few seconds before inclining his head. As you say, Your Eminence. Now, shall we head to the safe house? 113. The safe house was an underground bunker designed to withstand attacks from low-level spirit beasts in case of an outbreak. There were many of these bunkers throughout the city. Given that there were 3 portals in Ishtara and an outbreak could happen at any moment, these bunkers served as safe havens for people during emergencies. However, the bunker for the High Priest was different from the rest. It was grander and more luxurious, larger in size, and filled with various supplies along with high-end internet support. The High Priest could easily live there for over a year without ever needing to surface if he so desired. Hence, it was called a safe house. But High Priest Bowden wasn't going there to live for long. He merely wanted to wait out the chaos. The laboratory beneath his church was several times larger than the one under the Overlord Mansion, meaning there were more monsters in his lab. Now that he was about to unleash these abominations into the city, the scale of death and destruction would be unprecedented. He was confident that at least half of the city would be in ruins before the Central Monarch could intervene. Until then, he needed a place to stay safe. So, surrounded by at least a couple dozen bodyguards, High Priest Bowden stepped out of the church and headed for his sanctuary. The safe house was just a 5-minute walk away. As Bowden stepped onto the cracked pavement, the chaos of the city greeted him with open arms. Distant sirens wailed, horrified screams filled the air, and guttural roars echoed from the abominations. Fires raged in the distance, buildings crumbled, and dust and smoke rose to obscure the sky. The bodyguards formed a tight perimeter around Bowden, vigilantly scanning the streets for any potential danger. These elite bodyguards were handpicked for their loyalty and skill, but even they were not immune to the unease gnawing at their nerves. Some of them were low-ranked awakened, while others were trained mundane humans armed with enchanted artifacts. A soldier at his side adjusted his grip on his rifle. "Your Eminence, we should move quickly," he urged. But Bowden didn't respond. He already knew that 5 minutes was all he needed. He nodded and started walking. Soon, they arrived at their destination. Their short journey was largely uneventful, aside from a few beasts attempting to attack them, which the bodyguards easily dealt with. Unfortunately, they lost about 5 men in the process, but aside from that, nothing much happened. High Priest Bowden was safe, and that was all that mattered. The entrance to the underground bunker was located inside a house, which thankfully had yet to be affected by the spreading fire, so it remained intact. The bodyguards provided cover and let the High Priest enter the house first, before closely following after him. Inside the house, they quickly found the entrance to the bunker and opened it, allowing Bowden to go in first again. The High Priest immediately began descending the stairs leading underground, landing on the sturdy metallic floor of the bunker in a few seconds. It was dark inside, as he had yet to switch on the lights. But he immediately sensed that something was off. And as if to validate his suspicions, the lights flickered on their own, and a deep voice called out to him from behind. "Hello, Bowden. Didn't think you'd meet me here, did you?" Bowden froze. A cold chill ran up his spine. This place, no one but him was supposed to know about it. Only he knew this safe house's location. So why was there someone else present here? And more importantly, why did that voice sound so familiar? The High Priest swallowed hard, and slowly turned around. His breath hitched as he saw someone casually sitting on a leather chair in the middle of the bunker. It was a man draped in a dark coat, one leg crossed over the other. His presence was unnervingly relaxed, as if he belonged here more than Bowden himself. His face was partially hidden by the dim lighting, but the smirk on his lips was unmistakable. Around that man, several guards in crisp black uniforms were present, armed with a variety of enchanted weapons. Bowden couldn't believe his eyes. He knew that smirk. He knew that voice. He knew that face. "Everin," he rasped. The figure chuckled and leaned forward slightly. Surprised, Bowden's mind raced. This was impossible. Everin was either supposed to be dead or on the run. He shouldn't be here. How did he even know about this place? By then, Bowden's guards had also entered the bunker. And the moment they spotted Everin and his retinue, they drew their weapons. In response, the Overlord guards brandished their own weapons. And took a fighting stance. Both groups stood at the brink of violence, waiting for their leaders to give the command. "Why are you here?" Bowden asked, disbelief still lacing his voice. "And how did you find my hideout's location, Everin?" The Overlord chuckled again, though this time, he sounded more threatening than amused. "You think you're the only one who knows how to backstab, Bowden?" Everin tilted his head before pointing at a hooded man standing beside the High Priest. "You should be proud. Your pupil learned well. He betrayed you, you fucking snake." Bowden's eyes widened as he turned to face his informant. But the hooded man looked just as shocked by that ridiculous accusation. He exclaimed and turned to Bowden, "What? No, High Priest, that's a lie. I would never betray you." Bowden's gaze hardened as he studied the man. His informant's wide eyes darted between him and Everin, looking genuinely bewildered as sweat formed on his brow. Everin laughed. "That's what they all say. But tell me, Bowden, if your guy didn't sell you out, then how the hell did I get here?" Bowden clenched his fists. That was a good question. Only he and his informant knew about the existence of this safe house. There was no way for Everin to know about this place or even get here unless his informant really did betray him. No, Bowden shook his head. This wasn't the time to doubt his own people. Especially not his informant. He had found this boy starving in an alley. He had taken him in, clothed him, fed him, and taught him. He raised him like he was his own blood. He raised him like a son. Bowden refused to accept that his own son would do this to him. "I don't believe you," he said coldly. "He's my right hand, my family, He'd never betray me, not for the likes of you. The informant hesitated before pulling back his hood, revealing his face. He had a bald head just like Bowden's, and from the looks of it, he was a young man barely past his teens. Tears welled in his eyes as he turned to the high priest. "Thank you, Your Eminence." Everin rolled his eyes and waved a hand dismissively. "Whatever. Believe what you want. It makes no difference to me. What I do care about, however, is this: why did you send those cadets after me?" Bowden snapped his head toward Everin. "What? I didn't send anyone after you." He spat. "If anything, you sent a thief to steal the sensitive data of our dealings from me. That thief then double-crossed you and sold everything to those cadets for money, and now you're here blaming me. You dug your own grave." Everin scowled. "What the fuck are you talking about? What thief? What data? I didn't send anyone. Don't try to twist this, Bowden. We had a good thing going. And you ruined it for your own selfish gain." "My selfish gain?" Bowden barked back. "You're the selfish one here. The church is a thorn in your path, so you want us gone. That's why you're trying to pin this on me, on the church." "Oh, shut the hell up." Everin shouted. "You sent those cadets after me. You tried to put all the blame on me." Bowden's patience snapped. His voice rose. "For the last time, I didn't send any fucking cadets after you. And I only tried to pin the blame on you after what you did." But Everin had heard enough. "Silence. I will not hear any more excuses from you." He roared and turned to his guards with rage flashing in his eyes. "Kill them. Kill them all. You conniving son of a whore." Bowden snarled before spinning toward his own men. "Bring me his head." And just like that, the whole underground bunker was drowned by the sounds of gunfire, the clash of steel, and the screams of the dying. Within moments, the safe house became a blood-soaked battlefield. But, unbeknownst to all these poor souls, the true mastermind behind this chaos, the one man who had set everything in motion, was waiting just above the bunker's entrance. 114. It was mayhem. Mundane guards were either shooting at each other or activating their enchanted artifacts. Meanwhile, the Awakened had already deployed their origin cards. This underground bunker was built to withstand attacks from low-level spirit beasts. Its reinforced walls were durable enough to contain the chaos of Awakened combat. And so, in less than 5 minutes, the floor was already littered with corpses. Half of the people were dead. "Your Eminence, watch out." A guard jumped in front of Bowden and took a bullet to his chest. He gasped painfully and collapsed to the ground, dead. Bowden cursed under his breath, but before he could react, another guard stepped in front of him. This one was Awakened. Without hesitation, he raised a hand, and an energy barrier shimmered into existence, shielding the high priest from the oncoming hail of bullets. Bowden barely had time to process the first man's sacrifice before another barrage of gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the energy barrier, their impact sending ripples across its translucent surface. The Awakened guarding him gritted his teeth, his fingers trembling as he funneled even more energy into the shield. Across the room, Everin moved like a wraith. The Overlord was strong. His innate power allowed him to compress air and release it in crescent arcs. Basically, he could shoot blades of wind sharp enough to carve through flesh and bone. He could also manipulate high-pressure air to blanket his body, softening the impact of physical attacks. It was a power that was both offensive and defensive, allowing him to go on a rampage without needing to be concerned about his own safety. And that was exactly what he was doing. He was cutting through his enemies with brutal efficiency. They tried to shoot him down, but the bullets never reached him, dropping harmlessly to the ground as they met the invisible wall of his air barrier. His Awakened warriors fought alongside him, their glowing origin cards hovering around them. "Hold the line," Bowden shouted. His voice was barely audible over the carnage. "We outnumber them. They can't." Boom! An explosion rocked the bunker. The ceiling groaned as dust and debris rained down. One of the energy-powered lamps flickered, plunging half the room into darkness for a moment. When the light returned, Everin was already moving toward Bowden with the grace of a predator. Several of Bowden's guards rushed forward to stop him, but most of them were intercepted by the enemy men. The unlucky few who did make it to the Overlord died almost instantly. He was an unstoppable force. He tore through the flesh of whoever dared to step too close to him as if they were made of paper. He ripped them apart. Blood dripped from his hands, and his dark eyes locked onto Bowden with lethal intent. "You talk too much," he sneered, stepping forward as even more guards rushed at him. Bowden's breath hitched as he took a step back. His guards still outnumbered Everin's men 2-1. But at the rate Everin was butchering them, numbers would soon mean nothing. And yet, Bowden's lips curved into a bitter smile. He had been prepared for this. The day he shook hands with the Overlord, he knew he needed to find a way to kill him should things ever go south. Because if you were making a deal with a monster, you had to be certain you could slay it when the time came. So, a few weeks ago, Bowden spent a large chunk of his resources in order to acquire an artifact powerful enough to level the playing field. Since he wasn't awakened himself, the only way for him to kill a B-rank awakened was to wield a weapon that could do the job. And now was the time to use it. Tied to his waist was a black satchel. It was a small leather bag, resembling an unassuming fanny pack. In truth, it was a high-grade artifact capable of storing objects several times its size. Bowden opened the bag and reached inside it with a hand. Inside, his fingers wrapped around cold metal. A moment later, he pulled out a long staff adorned with several metallic rings at its tip. A high-grade essence stone was embedded in its handle, shining with a bright yellow glow. It was a shakuho. Bowden turned to his left, where a young boy with a bald head was standing quietly. That was his informant. "Go, my child," Bowden said to him. "Buy me some time." The boy met his gaze and nodded respectfully. He pulled his hood up to cover his face and instantly summoned his origin card. He was only a C rank, awakened with a weak innate power. Against the Overlord, he stood no chance. But Bowden had no other option. His artifact was powerful, but it needed time to charge. 10 seconds. That was all the boy needed to buy him. "Don't die," Bowden said. "Yes, High Priest," the boy answered calmly. He took a deep breath, then pressed his hands together. A thin veil of shimmering light spread across his body. It was a defensive ability meant to bolster his durability. But against a monster like Everin, it was like trying to stop a hurricane with an umbrella. In front of him, the Overlord was locked in combat with a man. He was distracted. The boy took this chance and dashed forward. At that exact moment, Everin plunged his hand into his enemy's chest, crushing his heart and killing him on the spot. Before the dead body dropped to the ground, the boy leapt high in the air. And by the time Everin sensed him, it was too late. He was already descending like a meteor. Shock flickered in the Overlord's eyes as the boy spun midair and brought his leg down in an overhead kick. Everin only had enough time to raise his arms in defense and block the blow. But aside from being a little surprised, he was unscathed. His hand shot out and grabbed the boy's leg. Then, he whirled around and threw the boy aside like a ragdoll. The boy hit the ground hard, rolling several times before coming to a stop. He groaned weakly but wasted no time to push himself up and rush forward once again. Everin frowned. This young man was tougher than he looked. His movements were unrefined, but he had the talent to fight. Unfortunately, talent wouldn't save him tonight. His loyalty was going to get him killed. Everin raised his hand and unleashed a wind blade. But the boy didn't stop. He ducked under the incoming wind blade and kept running. Everin's frown deepened. Dodging his wind blades wasn't easy. The wind was invisible, after all. You needed exceptional instincts to evade an invisible attack. The boy lunged forward and swept his leg in a wide arc toward Everin's chin. But once again, Everin caught the boy's leg with effortless ease and halted his attack like it was nothing. Then, in the blink of an eye, he unleashed another wind blade. With his leg trapped, the boy had no way to dodge. He twisted his torso at the last possible moment, desperately trying to protect his vital organs, but the blade still tore across his left shoulder, leaving behind a deep gash. Blood spurted from his wound, and he screamed in agony as the Overlord slammed him into the ground. Hurt and unable to get back up, he writhed on the cold floor, gasping for breath. Everin loomed over him like a shadow of death. Without a speck of mercy, the Overlord outstretched his hand, gathering the air into a razor-sharp blade, ready to end the boy's life. But before he could do it, Bowden's voice rang out from behind him. "Stop, Everin!" Everin scowled and turned. The High Priest was standing a few steps away from him, but what caught Everin's attention was the shakuho in his grip. "A monk's staff," Everin scoffed, unfazed. "I knew you had a trump card, but that's it. How do you plan to kill me with that? Shame me to death." Bowden didn't answer. He simply tightened his grip on the staff and took a slow step forward. The rings at its tip jingled softly. Then, with a deep breath, he struck the base of the staff against the metal ground. Boom! A pulse of energy erupted from the impact, sending a shockwave rippling through the room. The air itself trembled as a powerful force spread outward. Everin's smirk faltered. A strange pressure bore down on him, and for the first time, his air barrier wavered, distorting unnaturally. "What?" he muttered. Bowden's bitter smile widened. "This isn't just a monk's staff, Overlord," he said mockingly. "It's called Faith Sealer." Everin's pupils shrank. Faith Sealer. It was an artifact capable of suppressing an Awaken's origin card. But realization struck too late. Bowden slammed the staff against the ground once more, and the high-pressure air around Everin collapsed, his barrier vanishing in an instant. Even his origin card dissipated into light particles and returned to his soul. Bowden then swiftly reached into his leather bag and pulled out a handgun, aiming it at Everin. But instead of hesitating or showing even a flicker of fear, the Overlord merely crossed his arms over his head and charged forward like a raging bull. Bowden pulled the trigger. The first shot struck Everin in the abdomen. But he didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. Bowden fired again, and again. Bullets tore into Everin's right leg, left thigh, both arms, and several more punched into his abdomen. Yet he didn't stop. He kept speeding forward like an unstoppable truck. Step after step, he closed the distance, tanking the bullets as if his body was made of iron. Bowden's eyes widened in horror as the gun clicked empty. He was out of bullets. Before he could react, Everin slammed into him shoulder first, sending him flying backward. Bowden crashed into the bunker's cold, metallic wall. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. Several of his ribs were crushed. The emptied gun slipped from his fingers as he crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. The Overlord himself wasn't in much better shape. He had been shot 12 times, and his wounds were bleeding profusely. But he was still on his feet. He was weak and staggering, but still walking toward the High Priest. Breathing raggedly, Everin came to stand before Bowden. The High Priest remained on his knees, coughing violently. "You foolish man," the Overlord snarled. "Do you know the difference between a C rank awakened and a B rank?" His voice was hoarse but brimming with rage. "We can circulate essence. We are harder to kill. You thought suppressing my powers would level the playing field for you." His lips curled into a blood-stained sneer. "We awakened are closer to gods than men, you fool. You can never, Kuaa." Everin's rant was cut short by a sharp jolt of pain that assaulted his chest. He let out a gasp as his body stiffened. It took him a second to realize that someone had stabbed him from behind. With trembling eyes, he slowly looked down and saw a bloodied blade sticking out from his chest. His mind reeled, struggling to process the sensation, cold, burning agony spreading through his body. Bowden blinked, equally stunned. Behind Everin stood the young boy from before, his hood fallen back to reveal his sweat-slicked face. His small hands trembled as he gripped the hilt of a blood-stained artifact. He had grabbed this sword from a corpse on the ground and stabbed Everin with it when his back was turned. The boy's expression was unreadable as he twisted the blade. Everin choked. A wet, ragged sound escaped his throat. He staggered forward, his knees nearly buckling as his body betrayed him. The boy didn't hesitate. With a resolute breath, he wrenched the sword free, blood sprayed across the bunker floor. Then, with both hands, he raised the blade high and swung. The sword cleaved clean through flesh and bone. Everin's head separated from his shoulders and fell to the ground with a sickening thud. For a moment, the Overlord body remained standing, as if refusing to acknowledge its own death. Then, slowly, it collapsed on the ground, lifeless. The bunker fell silent. The boy lowered the sword, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath as he stared at the severed head at his feet. Bowden, still kneeling against the wall, exhaled shakily, "Good boy." And with that, the battle was over. Everyone was dead, except for the young man and the High Priest. They had won, or so they thought. The bunker door soon hissed open, and a golden-haired boy stepped inside. 115. I had followed the High Priest and his men to the safe house, keeping a careful distance so they wouldn't spot me. Inside the house, hidden under the floorboards, was the entrance to an underground bunker. I let them enter the bunker first, then waited just outside it. I knew the Overlord was inside, waiting for the High Priest. I knew they would fight. I knew they would kill each other. And that's exactly what they did. 15 minutes. That was all it took for them to kill each other. The gunshots stopped, the screams faded, and the silence returned. Only 2 people were left alive by the end of it all, the High Priest and a young man who was his informant. Finally, I decided it was my time to move. So, I moved. I opened the entrance, climbed down the stairs, and stepped inside the bunker. The interior was exactly as I had expected. The cold floor was littered with bodies, some still twitching, others already stiff. Blood pooled in uneven trails on the ground, while the metal walls were painted red. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, burnt flesh, and the foul stench of spilled entrails. Weapons lay discarded beside their fallen wielders, some broken, others still clutched in dead hands. Near the entrance, a severed arm twitched. Its fingers curled and uncurled around the hilt of a sword. It was creepy. In fact, this whole scene was creepy. It was carnage. I tiptoed around the blood and gore, careful not to dirty my new red leather boots. I'd bought these boots just a few days ago, and while they were cheap, they had grown on me. At the center of all the carnage, near the far end of the room, were the only two survivors. One was a tall old man with a wrinkled face, a protruding potbelly, and a bald head. He knelt on the ground, clutching his abdomen. That was the high priest. Judging by the way he trembled, he must have broken a few ribs. Beside him stood a younger man with softer features and a deep wound carved into his left shoulder. He was bald, too, like a young monk, but his ragged breath suggested he was barely holding himself together. The moment they noticed me, their eyes widened in shock and panic. I stopped a few paces away, watching, waiting for some kind of reaction. But instead of saying a word, they just stared at me. Like they'd just seen a ghost. I frowned. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Ah, then it dawned on me. See, while waiting outside the bunker, I got bored. So, I started munching on some popcorn. I still had the packet in my hand, chewing absent-mindedly. Right, that must have been it. It must have been so weird for them to see a handsome young gentleman like me stroll into this bloodbath, happily snacking away, and not even offer them any. How rude of me, I said, stretching the packet of popcorn out toward them. Want some? They blinked. Their gazes darted between me and the popcorn packet like I had just committed some unfathomable sin. Still, they said nothing. I clicked my tongue. Throwing the packet away, I sighed. Never mind, it wasn't that good anyway. That, finally, got a reaction. The high priest scrambled for his handgun, yanking a fresh magazine from his bag to reload. At the same time, the young man activated his origin card. A veil of shimmering light swiftly enveloped his body as he lunged at me with a sword in hand. Experience exclusive Tales on my virtual library empire. The moment he stepped into striking range, his blade flashed toward my neck. Damn, he was trying to cleave my head off. I took a single step back, dodging his sword with ease. He followed up with a thrust, and once again, I dodged by sidestepping. Hey, no need to get so mad. I jested. I was just offering some popcorn. Then I punched him in the face. He staggered back, blood dripping from his nose as he winced in pain. But before he could catch a breath, I grabbed his head with both hands, yanked it down, and slammed my knee into his face with vicious force. His body jolted and a pained grunt escaped his throat. But I was still not done. I snatched the sword from his grip and swept his legs out from under him with a low kick. The moment he hit the ground after losing his footing, I drove the blade through his shoulder. Arghhhh. His scream echoed through the bunker as his face twisted in agony. By now, I had already summoned my origin card. Using my power, I melted the tip of the sword and welded it to the metallic floor, effectively pinning him in place. The high priest had used this time to finish reloading. He raised his gun, aimed it at me, and fired a shot. But I moved just in time. The bullet streaked past harmlessly. Another card materialized over my shoulder by then. It was steel hide. And as soon as I activated it, my skin hardened unnaturally for the next few seconds. Bang, 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 more shots rang out, but I didn't bother dodging anymore. The bullets struck me, but none of them tore through my flesh. It still hurt like hell, though. I'd definitely have bruises later. But walking calmly through gunfire like this, felt so cool. The high priest's face flashed with terror as I kept advancing step by step, unaffected by the bullets hitting me. His grip on the gun tightened and his shots became more frantic. Bang, bang, the bullets thudded uselessly against my chest, sending nothing but dull aches through my body. I grinned. Come on, old man, I said, dusting off my shoulder as if I'd been merely struck by raindrops. Why would you shoot me? I didn't even do anything, yet. His breath hitched. He tried to fire again. But this time, I didn't give him the chance. After all, the effects of steel hide were waning. I had to end it quickly. In a blink, I closed the distance. My hand clamped down on his wrist, forcing the gun upward. The next shot fired harmlessly into the ceiling. He let out a strangled gasp as I twisted his wrist. His fingers spasmed and the gun slipped from his grasp. But I caught it before it could hit the ground. Wait, he croaked, eyes wide. With fear. We can talk about this. I drove my knee into his gut. He wheezed in agony and doubled over, his potbelly jiggling from the impact. But before he could collapse, I grabbed his collar and pulled him close, his face inches away from mine. Talk, I mused. What kind of person shoots first and talks later? That's just bad manners. He trembled. His lips moved as he tried to say something. But I slapped him across the face before he could even utter a word. The force of it sent him sprawling to the ground. I watched amusedly as the high priest groaned, clutching his cheek, his wrinkled face contorted in pain. Then I crouched beside him, resting my chin on my palm. You know, I sighed, shaking my head, manners are important. If someone offers you food, you either accept it or politely decline. You don't start shooting them. He wheezed again, trying to push himself up. But I stood up and casually stomped on his back, forcing him to stay down on the ground. I mean, really, I continued, feigning disappointment. Didn't your mother teach you any better? How did you even become a high priest? He coughed, spitting blood onto the floor. Despite his trembling, his gaze was filled with rage when he looked up at me. Who the fuck are you? He roared, as angrily as he could in his state. Who, me? I tilted my head and smirked. I'm Samael Kaiser Theosbane, 116. The high priest's eyes widened the moment he heard my full name. His breath caught in his throat, and in a trembling voice laced with disbelief, he stammered, Th Theosbane. I nodded matter-of-factly. What's a Theosbane doing here? He asked, his pupils shrinking. What do you want? I arched an eyebrow. What do I want? I want many things, actually. A harem of beautiful sugar mummies who spoil me. A treasure chest that never runs out of gold. A devoted cult of admirers that worships me day and night. Before I could continue to voice my ridiculous wishes, the high priest cut me off. What do you want from us? Oh, I clapped my hands. Now you're being specific. From you, nothing. I already got what I wanted. I gestured vaguely at the room full of dead bodies and smiled amicably. I wanted you and the Overlord to fight to the death. You did it. Now, you're useless to me. The high priest's breath grew shallow. His pupils darted from corpse to corpse before snapping back to me. What? I frowned, then let out a soft chuckle as if realizing something funny. Oh, you still don't understand what happened here. You see, I am the one who was behind everything. I was the puppeteer pulling the strings. I made you fight each other. In the game, after winning the team test, Michael and his squad received their first mission as a reward. They had to investigate the spirit beast sightings in Ishtara. Experience tales at my virtual library empire. The task was simple. Find out what was happening in the city and report back to the academy. It wasn't supposed to turn ugly. But it did. Michael was the first to sense something was off. At first, it was little things. Inconsistencies in official statements, authorities refusing to answer questions properly, witness testimonies that made no sense. But the deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. First, he found that corruption ran deep in the city. Many high-ranking knights who should have been loyal to the central monarch were secretly in the Overlord pocket. The same went for most of the police officers. Second, he noticed that instead of trying to hunt down the spirit beasts, the authorities were using every resource available at their disposal to cover up the attacks. In fact, it seemed like they weren't trying to stop the spirit beasts at all. All their focus was on erasing the evidence that the attacks ever happened. And they were going to absurd lengths to do so. Michael, being the infuriatingly nosy bastard he was, kept investigating. He had a hunch, an itch at the back of his mind, that Lord Everin was somehow at the center of it all. And he was right. Under Overlord Everin's estate was a vast research facility. It was a laboratory filled with caged spirit beasts. The Overlord was running experiments on those abominations. He had been studying them for years, searching for a way to tame them. And he had succeeded. He found a way to mold them from birth, a way to condition their minds using a special device created by his scientists. By shaping them from a young age and altering the way their minds worked, he ensured they would remain loyal to him even after growing stronger. It was like training a wolf cub. Raise it young, and no matter how large it grows, it will always see its master as its god. Michael, like a typical shonen protagonist, led his squad to confront Overlord Everin. It was a long, dramatic battle, but in the end, the heroes managed to kill the Overlord and stop him from unleashing his spirit beast army on the city. Michael thought they had won. The Overlord was dead, and the Academy officials were soon arriving to shut down his lab. But then came a plot twist. At the last moment, Michael realized something significant. He began to question how the Overlord had acquired so many spirit beasts. Where did he get the funds to conduct his experiments? And how did he manage to recruit such intelligent scientists capable of creating a complex device to control the beasts? None of it made any sense, until it did. Michael recalled that the Overlord wasn't the only influential man in the city. There was also Bowden, the High Priest. While Lord Everin had most of the high-ranking knights and police officers under his thumb, the High Priest had connections with many top businessmen and wealthy families. The Overlord possessed power, but the High Priest controlled the flow of money. Therefore, the only way Lord Everin could have pulled something like this was if the High Priest had been supporting him from behind the scenes. And once again, Michael was right. Beneath the church, there was another research facility, an even larger laboratory than the one under the Overlord mansion. However, this realization came too late. Because by that time, the High Priest had unleashed his spirit beasts into the city, resulting in unprecedented chaos. Michael and his squad rushed to battle the monsters and save as many citizens as they could. The Academy officials also arrived to help protect the city. But it was all too little, too late. By the end of this crisis, more than half of the city lay in ruins, and thousands of lives had been lost. Those who survived were manipulated by the High Priest and ended up blaming the Central Monarch for the widespread destruction. They accused her of failing to protect her subjects. The truth about the High Priest's actions never came to light, since there was no evidence left to paint him as the culprit. The region of Kandara declared a vote of no confidence in the government and the Central Monarch, proclaiming itself a free nation. This decision sparked conflicts that eventually led to another war in the Kandara region, which then set off a chain of chaotic events. Kandara started fighting for freedom, while the monarchs started fighting to rule over it once again. It was only much later in the story that Michael learned about a secret society known as the Syndicate of the Nameless Lords, which was responsible for everything. The High Priest and the Overlord had merely been puppets, manipulated by this organization that pulled the strings from the shadows. The Syndicate was behind everything. I didn't like this storyline. So, I changed it. High Priest Bowden, still on the ground, looked up in genuine confusion. What do you mean you were behind everything? I smirked, tilting my head as I gazed down at him. I'm one of the cadets sent here by the Apex Academy, I said casually. After arriving, I made sure my squad's focus stayed locked on the Overlord. I forged some documents, fake, of course, but the things they exposed were real. I shrugged, like how the Overlord built a network of underground tunnels to deploy his beasts in the city. Or the blueprints of the research facility hidden under his mansion. As I spoke, the color drained from the High Priest's face. I continued, my tone light, almost amused. I let my squad discover those fake documents. To make sure they never doubted their authenticity, I had a certain police officer killed. After that, it was only a matter of time before they decided to raid the Overlord mansion. It was all just as I had planned. I crouched slightly, watching as realization dawned in his widening eyes. And from there, everything fell into place. I broke into your office and stole every bit of sensitive data I could find. Evidence of your dealings with the Overlord, proof of how you funded him, how you provided the workers for his construction projects. Bowden's lips parted as he tried to speak, but I didn't let him. I sent you a little blackmail message, I continued smoothly. Pretended to be a thief who was looking to make money. I told you that the Overlord had hired me to steal that data. And, naturally, you assumed he was planning to betray you. The High Priest's face twisted in a mix of rage and disbelief. I chuckled. You bought my lie. Hook, line, and sinker. I straightened up. Then I sent Overlord a text, this time, pretending to be your informant. I told him that the cadets were coming for him because you had sold him out. And, as a token of my goodwill, I gave him the location of your safe house. His breath hitched. The Overlord believed me, too. I shrugged. I don't know what he did with the cadets, but after dealing with them, he came straight here. The rest, well, you know the rest. I spread my arms, gesturing at the carnage around us. You came here. He was waiting for you. You both fought, just as I hoped you would. I tilted my head, my smirk turning into a wide grin. And in the end, you killed each other, or, well, you killed him. I took a step closer, watching as the full weight of the truth crashed down on him. Just like I hoped you would. 117. There was a moment of silence. Utter, suffocating silence. The High Priest raised himself up to his knees and stared at me, his face frozen in horror. His lips trembled, forming words he couldn't quite say. Then, at last, the denial came. He shook his head vehemently. His hands clawed at his robe. His voice rose in a frantic murmur. No, no, that can't be. You're lying, you're lying. He cried out. The Overlord wouldn't be fooled so easily. I wouldn't be fooled so easily. This is wrong. This can't be happening. He gasped as if trying to breathe through a nightmare. His fingers twitched, curling into fists, then uncurling just as fast. I can't be done in by a child, a fucking child. His scream echoed through the blood-stained chamber. His pupils shrank as his mind broke under the weight of it all. It was a classic breakdown of a man who understood his fate was sealed but refused to believe it. Then, suddenly, his gaze snapped to me. There was a deranged look in his eyes. You, his tone was a mix between fury and pleading. What do you want? Money, power, fame, women, I'll give you everything. I'll give you everything you could ever want. His hands stretched toward me, trembling. Just let me live. Work with me. I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. I can make you great. I laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh that made it clear I wasn't even considering his offer. Old man, I said, amusedly tilting my head. I don't think you understand. I already told you, I don't want anything from you. You're useless to me. The high priest's breath hitched. His eyes darted around the room, at the corpses, the blood-slicked floor, the severed limbs. His lips parted, but no words came out. His throat worked uselessly, like a fish gasping for air. Then his face twisted. Desperation curdled into rage. You little shit, he cursed. What are you after? Why are you doing this? Who sent you? Who are you working for? I smirked. I don't work for anyone. And it's nothing personal. I'm not after you. I'm after the treasure you've been hoarding here in this very bunker. As soon as I said that, the high priest's jaw dropped. His fingers twitched, and for a second, I could see his mind go blank, his entire thought process grinding to a halt. Then, after a few seconds, he swallowed thickly. How do you know about that? No, wait, his voice faltered. How did you even know about this safe house? I didn't answer. After all, I couldn't just tell him that I knew everything from a game. In one of the storylines of Spirit Realm Chronicles, Michael discovered the High Priest's hideout by accident and found a literal treasure room beneath it. But, being the goody two-shoes he was, he handed everything over to the Academy officials. I wasn't as honest as him. Everything I had done in Ishtara, the schemes, the misdirections, the carefully laid traps, had all been in order to acquire that treasure. That was my endgame. The High Priest licked his lips, then extended his hands in a placating gesture. Fine, take it, take everything you want, you don't have to kill me for it. I chuckled, shaking my head. That's not possible. His eyes narrowed as he screamed again. Why not? Because, I said calmly, you'll die tonight for your sins. His expression changed. First came confusion, then disbelief, then something dark and ugly. My sins, I nodded. You were an accomplice to the Overlord. Together, you slaughtered countless innocent people. And tonight, you unleashed your abominations in the city. Hundreds are already dead, and the number is still rising. Bowden's jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. Then, he laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero. I said nothing. What do you even know about the world, boy? He barked. There are forces at play here. You're messing with the wrong people if you so much as lay a finger on me. I couldn't help but chuckle at this fool. Oh, I know more than you think, High Priest. I said evenly. I know you work for the Nameless Lords. And the moment I said those words, his eyes bulged and shock flashed across his wrinkled face. But then, just as quickly, it twisted into confusion. Why, you know about the Syndicate of the Nameless Lords? He stammered. Yes, I scoffed. I know they were the ones who funded you. Who gave you resources, scientists, and spirit beasts to experiment on. This was their plan from the beginning. You and the Overlord, you might not know, but you both were just small pieces on their big board. Yes, in truth, it wasn't the Overlord or the High Priest who wanted control over the spirit beasts. It was the Syndicate. They needed a place to conduct their experiments in secret, far from the oppressive influence of the 5 monarchs. And there was only one such place in the world. It was a region where even the monarchs couldn't interfere or send their vassals since they were all bound by a treaty. A neutral zone known as Kandara. Or more specifically, its capital city, Ishtara. Even the central monarch herself, who was the ruler of this region, couldn't set foot here without risking a world war. So the Syndicate seized the opportunity. They approached the High Priest and the Overlord of Ishtara with a deal they couldn't refuse. The Syndicate offered them power in exchange for overseeing their experiments. They made a promise that once the experiments were complete, the Overlord and the High Priest would have an army of spirit beasts, monsters only they could control. Then, after overthrowing the Central Monarch's rule, they would be crowned kings of Kandara. And like the short-sighted greedy fools they were, Lord Everin and High Priest Bowden accepted that deal without hesitation. They swore their loyalty to the Syndicate. But in reality, they were never more than puppets. When the experiments were done, the Overlord and the High Priest unleashed their spirit beasts into the city. Ishtara burned, thousands died, and when the dust settled, the High Priest stood before the world and blamed the Central Monarch for being unable to defend her subjects. Kandara turned its back on the monarchs and declared itself a free nation. The High Priest ruled as its king, until one of the Syndicate's assassins disposed of him. Wars broke out between the monarchs once again to claim Ishtara under their rule, exactly as the Syndicate had planned. They had orchestrated everything from behind the curtains. And by the time the world realized it, it was already too late. But then why? If you know the Syndicate is backing me and how dangerous they are, then why the hell are you crossing them? Bowden pointed a shaking finger at me. You should be working with us. I clicked my tongue and sneered. Whatever amicability had been on my face was gone, replaced by disgust. I looked at the fat old man before me the way one might look at filth. The Syndicate are traitors to humanity, I said, my voice cold. They seek to wake up the Spirit King and kneel before him. They think humanity is doomed, so they want to surrender our fate to a powerful deity like him. But of course, you wouldn't know that. I shook my head. You wouldn't even know who the Spirit King is. I'm not the ignorant one here, High Priest, you are. Bowden frowned as the first hint of genuine confusion crossed his face. The Spirit King, who? What the hell are you talking about? You don't need to know, I said simply. You don't need to know anything, except that you betrayed your own kind by siding with the Syndicate. I took a step forward. You slaughtered so many people. And for what? For power, for greed, for the promise of your own little kingdom. I clicked my tongue again. You're pathetic. My words were dripping with venom when I spit them out next. There is nothing more deplorable than a creature who betrays their own species. You did that. You committed the highest form of treason. And for that, you'll die. I pointed the gun I had snatched from him earlier at his face and got ready to shoot. Bowden, still stunned by my words, shook himself out of his daze and began pleading in a panic. No, wait. We can talk about this. I made a mistake, okay. You can't kill me. It's against the law. Let the police arrest me. I have rights to a proper trial. But when he saw I wasn't listening, the fear in his eyes burned into rage once again. Fuck you. You aren't so different from me. You talk like you're above it all, but you're just as greedy. If you really knew everything, you could have reported it to your academy from the start. Instead, you let us kill each other so you could swoop in, take out the last survivor, and steal the treasure, didn't you? You let so many people die just so you could walk away with something in your hands. A smile tugged at my lips. Wow, I'm impressed you figured out my plan after I spelled it out for you. I chuckled. You're right, though, you and I aren't so different. Indirectly or directly, we've both killed for power. The difference is, I'll use mine to ensure humanity's survival. I may not be a hero, but I'm not a villain either. I tilted my head. Or maybe I am, who knows. I let the words hang between us before continuing. Anyway, since I'm impressed by your ability to detect the obvious, how about I cut you a deal? A flicker of suspicion crossed his face. A deal? Yes. I nodded. One of the lockers in the treasure room below is locked with a special seal, right? No one can open it without the key in your possession. I want that key. In the game, Michael never took anything from that treasure room. He handed over everything he found to the Academy officials, except for a single relic. An enchanted artifact, a weapon, a soulbound greatsword that could split into dual longswords, which could then transform into a bow. Yes, it was a weapon with 3 forms. But that wasn't what made it special. What made that artifact special was its self-imposed condition. Whenever its wielder's life was in mortal danger, its lethality would increase 100-fold. Because of that enchantment, Michael was able to survive countless near-death encounters in the story. That weapon was called the Divine Sword Oriath. Unfortunately, it was locked inside a special box that couldn't be opened without a unique key. Well, a B rank awakened could break it open. Michael did the same. Using his demonic sword, he was able to cut the locker open. I had no such luxury. Neither I was a B rank awakened yet, nor did I have a mythical sword on me. So, I needed the key. Bowden's lips curled in a sneer. And I suppose you'll still kill me after I give it to you? Yes. I nodded. He clenched his jaw. Then why the fuck would I give you anything? Go ahead, kill me. I'll see you in hell. My smile widened. Oh, not so fast, old man. I took a few steps back and stopped beside the young man I had pinned to the ground earlier. The sword was still lodged in his shoulder, holding him in place. He grunted, struggling to break free, but the pain kept him down. When he noticed me beside him, his eyes widened, and his struggle intensified. I pointed the gun at him and grinned. If you don't give me what I want, I'll kill him. Bowden sucked in a sharp breath, but he forced out a laugh. Go ahead, kill him, he's nothing but a pawn. The boy's body went rigid. He tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I smirked. Good to know. Then, I pulled the trigger. A single shot rang out. Arghhh. The boy howled as the bullet tore through his leg. His back arched and body convulsed in seething agony. Bowden's eyes twitched. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I sighed and fired again. Another shot. Another scream. The boy's voice cracked. He clawed at the ground as his skin turned pale and his lips trembled. Blood pooled beneath him as he writhed uncontrollably. Bowden flinched. I knelt beside the boy, pressed the barrel against his other leg, and cocked the hammer. Last chance, Bowden, I threatened. Give me the key. I'll open the locker one way or another, but if you comply, I wouldn't kill the boy. This is my deal. The boy let out a choked sob. His screams had faded into broken whimpers, his breath shallow and uneven. His body quivered feverishly. I fired another shot, causing him to cry out in pain again. Tears rolled down his cheeks as his eyes closed and he fell unconscious. I pointed the gun toward his heart, actually ready to kill him. Bowden's fists clenched. His eyes were full of conflict as his gaze flickered between me and the boy. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. He tried to push himself up. He tried to stand on his feet, but his body failed him. He crumpled back to the ground and started crawling toward us. I was about to press the trigger. Then, stop, he shouted in desperation. Stop, just stop. I'll give it to you. Just stop. I smiled. Good choice. His hands shook as he reached into his leather bag, fumbling until he pulled out a small, ornate key. His fingers tightened around the key as he hesitated. But alas, with a heavy breath, he extended it toward me. I walked up to him and plucked it from his trembling grip. See, that wasn't so hard. Bowden exhaled sharply as his shoulders slumped. He looked at the bleeding boy one last time, then glared back at me. You're a monster, he loathed. I hummed. As you said, I'll see you in hell. Before he could say another word, I pulled the trigger. A single shot. A clean hole through his forehead. His eyes went blank. His body swayed. Then, with a dull thud, he collapsed onto the blood-stained floor. Silence filled the bunker once more. My plan was complete. 118. I let out a quiet sigh and tossed the gun away. Then, I looked at the corpse. High Priest Bowden lay sprawled on the blood-slicked floor. His body was still warm, but his face was frozen in the kind of expression most people only make once in their lives, right before they die. His final moment, captured forever. It was almost poetic. Except I wasn't feeling particularly poetic right now. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, sighing again, I crouched down and grabbed his arm. Heavy bastard, I muttered while struggling to lift him up. The guy was deadweight, and I meant literally. Also, dragging him wasn't exactly appealing. But I didn't have a choice. Your next read awaits at my virtual library empire. The treasure room's entrance was locked behind a 3-factor biometric authentication system. Retina scan, vein pattern recognition, DNA verification, a level of security that bordered on paranoia. Unfortunately for Bowden, he was the key. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a clean cloth. No way was I touching his blood-soaked robes with my bare hands. With some effort, I hoisted him onto my back like a grotesque backpack as his limbs swung limply by my sides. It was unpleasant. It was also necessary. I started walking toward the underground entrance, stepping over bodies and walking around pools of blood. The metallic floor was slick in places. I had to be careful not to slip. But I also couldn't afford to waste time. Blood doesn't stop flowing immediately after death. From 0 to 5 minutes, it still moves in the body due to residual pressure in the veins and arteries. I needed to get Bowden to the underground floor within that time frame. Because if the blood stopped flowing in his veins, the security system's liveness detection would determine him dead, and the biometric locks wouldn't open. So I hurried as much as I could without losing my footing. Looking at all the gore, I felt sick to my stomach. But I had a feeling that while this was my first time wading through the aftermath of a bloody massacre, it wasn't going to be my last. After reaching the reinforced door that led downstairs, I pressed Bowden's palm against the biometric panel. The scanner beeped, processing his fingerprints. A moment later, a dull click sounded and the lock disengaged. The door hissed open, revealing a well-lit stairwell descending to the lowest floor of the bunker. I adjusted my grip on Bowden's corpse. Then, letting out a tired sigh, I started walking down the stairs. The underground floor was colder than the bunker above. The air was still and undisturbed, carrying the faint scent of dust and metal. I was standing in a narrow corridor right now. At the very end of this corridor, bathed in dim emergency lighting, there was the entrance to the treasure room. To get inside, you had to pass through a thick titanium door. The only way to open it was through a biometric panel mounted on the wall beside it, equipped with 3 different types of scanners. There were security measures in place for anyone dumb enough to try brute forcing their way inside. Just like Michael did in the game. Since he found this bunker, and the treasure room, by accident, he had no way to bypass the biometric authentication. So, he did what any dumbass would do. He used his demonic sword, and after a little effort, he managed to carve a hole in the titanium door. But the moment he stepped inside, he was bombarded by lasers, turrets, and force field traps. He only survived thanks to his plot armor and his absurdly high strength. Any normal C-rank awakened dumb enough to try and break through would either die or be chased away by the security measures. Actually, a normal C-rank awakened wouldn't even be able to get through that titanium door. Michael only managed because his demonic sword was a powerful artifact, one that could cut through almost anything, as long as he could supply it with enough essence. I could maybe use my innate power to bend the metal and create an opening, but I wasn't strong enough to deal with the security measures inside. Which was why I needed Bowden. I let out a breath and adjusted the high priest's dead body on my back. Alright, old man, time to be useful one last time. I stepped forward and positioned his face in front of the retinal scanner. A soft whir filled the air as the machine activated. A thin red light flickered across his lifeless eye, scanning for identification. A second later, a monotone voice rang out. Retina scan complete. Identification. High Priest Bowden. Access level confirmed. I shifted, adjusting his arm to press his palm against the vein scanner. As I did, I gently squeezed his wrist a few times to stimulate blood flow. Another beep. Another confirmation. Finally, I retrieved a small knife from my pocket and made a shallow incision on his fingertip. A bead of blood welled up as I pressed it against the DNA scanner. A final chime resounded. All authentication factors confirmed. Access granted. With a deep mechanical groan, the titanium door began to slide open. I shook my head. Paranoid bastard. Who the hell keeps this level of security in a treasure room? Okay, most people do. But if Bowden had made it just a little easier for burglars to break into, he'd still be alive. I would have just stolen everything I needed and left without orchestrating such an intricate plan. But no, he had to be difficult. So, in the end, I had to kill him. My thoughts were interrupted as the door slid open completely, revealing the treasure room beyond. The first thing I saw were rows of storage containers lining the walls, each marked with security codes and caution symbols. Some held weapons, some held artifacts, some held things I had no intention of opening. Then, I saw gold, jewels, relics, stacks of rare artifacts, and at the very center it, secured in a heavily locked case sealed with shimmering runes, was what I had come for. The divine sword Oriath. I let Bowden's body slump to the ground. Then, with a small smirk, I stepped into the room. And immediately started squealing like a lunatic. Wee, woo-woo, booyah. I threw my hands up in the air and ran around the chamber like I'd just been declared king of the world. The amount of gold in this room was ridiculous. No, really, I could swim in it. And so I did. I dove into the pile of gold, running my hands through the cold metal, letting it spill between my fingers. I literally swam in gold. When I got bored of that, I put on every piece of shiny jewelry that caught my eye and used my innate power to create a golden crown. Then, I placed the crown on my head like a true king. After that, I took some selfies. For a split second, I had the not-so-brilliant idea of uploading those pictures on my social media. Then, common sense returned, and I discarded that thought. But it would have been cool. After a few minutes of playing around, I started to lose interest. I guess it's finally time to do some work, I sighed one more time, stretching as I walked up to the secured case at the center of the room. It was a tall locker made of all black steel. Shimmering runes were engraved across its surface, glowing with a faint violet hue. These runes made it nearly impossible to break open, unless you were a B rank awakened. Thankfully, I had already taken the key from Bowden before I killed him. I pulled it out and slid it into the keyhole. A quiet click echoed as the locker door swung open without any issue. Inside, resting on a velvet pedestal, was the divine sword Oriath. It gleamed like it was made of gold, not the dull, tarnished gold of old relics, but a brilliant, almost ethereal glow as if the metal itself was infused with light. The blade was long and wickedly sharp. Its hilt was wrapped in dark leather that was a stark contrast to the shiny blade, and its crossguard flared outward in jagged spikes, resembling the cruel rays of a burning sun. At the center of the crossguard was a hollow circle, and intricate runes were etched along the length of the blade, creating a mesmerizing pattern. I couldn't contain my smile as I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the hilt of the greatsword. Lifting it from the pedestal, I immediately noticed that it was heavier than it looked, yet perfectly balanced. I raised it slightly and admired its craftsmanship for a few minutes. Suddenly, I wished I had an appraisal card in my arsenal so that I could inspect the sword's enchantments. I glanced around. The treasure room was filled with plenty of artifacts, but there were no cards. Ah, I guess I'll appraise it after I get back to the academy, I shrugged before moving on to open the other lockers. I wasn't here just for the sword, though that had been the main reason. Somewhere in this room, there was something else I needed. A pile of essence stones. The Syndicate had sent all this gold, these weapons, these artifacts, everything, to the High Priest so he could amass an army for them. And for an army to wield these artifacts, they needed essence stones. Well, at least the mundane people did. Awakened could imbue artifacts with their own essence, but even they needed essence stones to level up their soul rank. Basically, essence stones were the single most important resource for any military force in this day and age. Aha, just as I expected, inside one of the lockers that I had casually sliced open with my new sword, I found 3 large duffel bags filled with high-quality, premium-grade essence stones. They shimmered like polished gemstones, each one unique in shape, size, and color. Hey, I grinned, then frowned. Now, how am I going to carry all this back with me? I glanced around. There had to be a spatial storage artifact somewhere in this room. There was one that I knew of, the leather fanny pack strapped to the High Priest's belt. Unfortunately, it was custom-made for him. Only he could operate it. And now that he was dead, no one else could use it. Maybe a highly skilled artificer could find a way to bypass that restriction. But I didn't know how. Which meant I had to find another storage artifact. It didn't take long. I found one tucked away in another locker. It was a robe, a very unconventional for a storage artifact, honestly. Most storage artifacts were bags or caskets. But this robe's inner pocket was linked to a small interdimensional storage space, making it capable of holding a number of items. It was even wide enough to store my sword. Maybe. I had to try. I nodded in satisfaction. This'll do. Quickly, I stuffed all the essence stones into the robe's pocket, then wore it over my shoulders. I even stuffed in as much gold as I could in it, until the small storage dimension inside was completely full. Once I made sure I wasn't forgetting to take anything important, I left the treasure room and headed out of the bunker. On my way out, I noticed the young boy I had pinned to the ground with a sword earlier. He was still unconscious. I had made a deal with the High Priest that I wouldn't kill him, and I intended to keep my word. Besides, I wasn't worried about him. I had already informed the academy about this place. Soon, officials would arrive to clean up the mess, and arrest him. After that, they would turn him over to the Central Monarch. Since he had served as the High Priest's informant, he had to know something about the Syndicate. And the Central Monarch would be very interested in hearing what he had to say. Maybe she'd torture him, maybe she'd use other methods to extract the truth from him. Either way, once he talked, one thing was certain. He would be executed, so there was no reason for me to break my end of the deal. I also noticed the monk staff that the High Priest had used to suppress the Overlord power. For a moment, I considered taking it. But then I decided against it. I had 2 reasons. First, there was no space left in my robe's pocket. Second, while that Shakuho was a powerful artifact capable of suppressing an Awakened's origin card, I was an Awakened. Which meant that if I ever had to use it, it would suppress my own powers as well. That made it useless to me in any real battle. It was fine, however. I had already gotten everything I had come to Ishtara for. 119. After pulling off the greatest heist of my life, I calmly walked out of the underground bunker. My heart was racing with excitement. The dimensional storage pocket of my new robe was filled with essence stones, and I held a brand new sword in my hand. To be honest, I was incredibly satisfied with how everything went. Sure, I could have been more efficient in my planning and there were some things I should have just done better. But at this point in the story, the best weapon I could have hoped to acquire was in my possession now, the Divine Sword Oriath. This sword was a soulbound artifact, meaning it would continue to grow stronger alongside me as my soul rank leveled up. It had many enchantments, one of which was a self-imposed condition. A condition was basically a limitation placed on an artifact or item that suppressed or restricted its power in exchange for much greater power when the specified condition was met. For example, imagine a bow that allows you to shoot only one arrow a day, but that single arrow would possess such explosive power that it could shatter a small mountain. Or perhaps a charm that forbids you from speaking for as long as you can, so when you finally do speak, your voice could split oceans and shake the heavens. Both of these types of items existed in the game, by the way. The sword I had, as I mentioned earlier, had a condition that significantly increased its lethality if its wielder's life was in mortal danger. I couldn't explain it in words, but that enchantment made this artifact feel like such a cheat item. In a worst-case scenario, when facing an overwhelmingly strong foe, it could serve as a final trump card, a literal embodiment of plot armor. Moreover, this sword could shift forms, splitting into dual single-edged longswords that could then transform into a bow. It also had two more enchantments, one that allowed it to burn raw essence from its user and convert it into light energy for attacks, and another that subtly increased the rate of essence absorption for its wielder as long as they held it in their hands. Truly, despite not being an actual divine sword, it deserved that title. Oh, yes, the Divine Sword Oriath wasn't crafted by the gods or something. It was made by a human, a genius artificer who had been captured by the Syndicate. Nevertheless, it was a human creation. The sword was referred to as divine because of its potential to grow infinitely, as long as its wielder continued to grow stronger. The Syndicate sent this sword to the High Priest, intending for him to give it to his general once he amassed an army for their cause. But this raises an interesting question. If the Syndicate could casually gift such a powerful artifact to someone like the High Priest, just how precious must the treasures in their headquarters be? How powerful an organization were they? I knew the answer, of course. After all, while playing the game, it took me so many attempts to completely eradicate the entire Syndicate. They were a pain in the ass, to say the least. But this was not a game. This was reality, and in this reality, I would only get one chance. Hey, I smiled a bitter smile. No problem, I would deal with them all when the time came. While making that resolution, I stepped out of the safe house and onto the street. A disorienting blend of screams, wails, and panicked voices assaulted my ears all at once. Sirens blared loudly, and emergency announcements were being made through the public speakers, loud enough for everyone to hear even in the chaos. The city is under attack. We repeat, the city is under attack. We urge all citizens to head to the nearest public underground bunker and remain there until the threat is neutralized. We also plead with any experienced awakened in the city to assist in combating the spirit beasts. The city is under attack. We repeat, to my right, houses were burning. The fire was spreading unchecked, creeping closer to where I stood. On the road, people frantically ran in every direction while being chased by grotesque abominations. The abominations moved on all fours. Their arched back was adorned with jagged bone spikes. Their gaping maws were full of razor-sharp teeth, and too many limbs sprouted from their swollen bodies, some thick and root-like that helped them move, others thin and writhing tentacles that helped them catch their prey. To my left, a woman was impaled by one of those tentacles. Not far from her, a man tripped and fell while trying to run away. He barely had time to push himself up before an abomination lunged at him and swallowed him whole. Suddenly, everything became too real. The gravity of the situation came crashing down on me. For a moment, I felt like I might throw up. It was a suffocating sensation to realize that everything that was happening all because of me. The truth was, despite trying to act nonchalant all this time, what I had done didn't sit right with me. But I had no other choice. Stay connected through my virtual library empire. The High Priest's treasure room was locked behind a 3-factor biometric authentication system. The only way to open that treasure room was to get Bowden's body. But he was never alone. He was always surrounded by a small army of high-grade, VIP-level security guards that I had no chance of defeating in a direct fight. So I had to find another way. I pitted the Overlord and the High Priest against each other. I made them believe they had been betrayed by one another. I did it so they'd kill each other, leaving Boden's corpse for me to take. Then I'd waltz in and bypass the biometric locks. But if I had just been stronger, I wouldn't have needed to do any of this. I could have fought the High Priest's security head-on, dragged him to the treasure room myself, and forced him to unlock it. If I had been strong enough, this situation could have been avoided. The High Priest and the Overlord wouldn't have had unleashed their spirit beasts into the city. And all these people wouldn't have died. Actually, it wasn't just about strength. I wasn't smart enough, either. Juliana or Vince Cleverly or some other smart character from the game could have come up with a better strategy where all of this bloodshed was avoidable. They might have crafted a plan to achieve their objective without needing to sacrifice so many innocent lives. But at last, I wasn't like them. I was just not enough. I sighed wistfully before shaking off those thoughts. It didn't matter. What was done was done. I couldn't change the past, so I focused on the present. Instead of crying about not being strong enough to stop this massacre, I decided to get stronger so that I'd never have to make that excuse again in the future. Besides, now wasn't the time to dwell on regret. Now was the time to do my job as a hunter in training, answer the call for help, and save as many people as I could. It was also a chance to test my new sword. Smirking to myself, I started moving. First in a jog, then a full-on sprint. I dashed forward and jumped onto an abomination's back just as it was about to bite a man's head off. Without hesitation, I drove my blade into its flesh. The beast let out a high-pitched screech and began thrashing around wildly, trying to throw me off its back. But before it could, I ran up to its head and carved it open with my blade, basically dissecting it. It let out a final painful growl before falling lifelessly to the ground. I jumped off its back and shouted at the stunned man whose life I had just saved. "Run, you idiot!" He blinked, still in shock that he was alive, then snapped out of it at the sound of my voice. With a quick, shaky nod of gratitude, he turned around and ran. I snapped my gaze forward. A few steps away, a little girl had fallen to the ground. Her mother was desperately trying to pull her up, but a monster was already charging at them. They weren't going to make it in time. I summoned my origin card and knelt, pressing my hand against the pavement. The road rippled like water before surging forward in a wave. That wave of concrete hardened right in front of the girl and her mother, forming a solid barrier that blocked the monster as it crashed into it. Before the beast could recover, the ground beneath it shifted and a sharp spike of concrete shot upward, skewering it through the torso. The mother held her little girl tightly in her embrace and ran. Meanwhile, I turned to face two more abominations. Outnumbered, I raised a wall of concrete to isolate the two beasts. Then, I made quick work of one with my innate power before turning to the other and killing it off with my sword in a few well-timed slashes. After that, I moved on to fight more spirit beasts. These abominations were massive and too many in numbers. Because of their tentacles, they also had a terrifyingly long reach. And I was fighting alone. So, I had to take them out by surprise or when they were distracted. I only picked the fights I knew I could win. Because of that, I couldn't save everyone. This was going to be a long night. 120. Michael, to your left. Lily's warning came just in time. Michael sidestepped at the last second and narrowly avoided the tentacle that lashed out to ensnare him. Without any hesitation, he raised his sword overhead and brought it down with tyrannical force, cleaving through the writhing limb easily like a wild vine. The beast he was fighting, Subject Omega, let out an ear-piercing shriek that rattled the air. For half a second, it disoriented everyone that was present. Everyone except Michael. Somehow, he stayed sharp and focused, even as the high-pitched noise clawed at his eardrums like nails on glass. And thankfully because of that, he saw the beast open its maw wide and shoot a thick glob of black saliva toward him. Michael threw himself to the side just in time again. The acidic spit struck the ground where he had stood a moment ago, sizzling violently as it rusted and ate through the metallic floor like lava. The stench of acid filled the air. Subject Omega recoiled, its grotesque, multi-eyed face twisting in a mixture of pain and mindless rage. Its severed tentacle twitched on the ground. Michael didn't give it a chance to recover. He lunged forward, closing the gap between them in a heartbeat. With both hands gripping his sword, he slashed at one of the beast's many legs, aiming to cripple its movement. The blade bit deep, but the beast's flesh was unnaturally tough. Instead of a clean cut, his sword only managed to carve halfway through. He twisted his body and wrenched the weapon free before Subject Omega could retaliate. "Michael, watch out," Lily's voice rang out again, sharper this time. He ducked without thinking. A flurry of tentacles whipped through the air, missing his head by inches. The sheer force of their movement stirred the wind and sent his hair into disarray. Michael rolled to the side, breathing hard. This time, Subject Omega took the lead. The beast pounced forward at him while Michael was still crouched. His eyes widened as the abomination swung one of its razor-sharp claws at him, aiming to shred his body apart like knives to paper. Fortunately, Michael managed to raise his sword just high enough to block the incoming blow with the flat of his blade. The impact still flung him back. He hit the ground hard but rolled with the momentum and sprang to his feet. After jumping to his feet and assuming his fighting stance, Michael clenched his jaw. "I need to end this fast." He wasn't in a very good condition. His lustreless black armor was dented, caved in places, and on the brink of shattering into fading light particles. His body was littered with black and blue bruises, and his essence pool was draining dangerously fast. To his left, across the laboratory, Alexia and Kong were battling Subject Alpha. That abomination was twice as tall as the one Michael was facing, and considerably stronger as well. Lily, the only support in the team, had the responsibility of controlling the flow of battle, guiding and moving her teammates like chess pieces to checkmate their opponent. Her plan was simple. Alexia and Kong would hold Subject Alpha at bay. Meanwhile, Michael would take on Subject Omega alone. It was smaller and weaker than its counterpart, making it the easier target. Once Michael finished his fight, he'd join Alexia and Kong, and together they'd overwhelm Subject Alpha. The strategy was simple and easy to follow. The execution, however, was proving to be difficult. While Subject Omega was indeed smaller and slightly weaker among the two beasts, it was exceptionally fast and agile. Stay updated with my virtual library empire. Its reaction speed was off the charts, and its instincts were honed like a predator that had spent its entire existence hunting. Whenever Michael closed in on it, the beast would somehow find a way to twist its grotesque body out of harm's way or counter with its flurry of tentacles. It fought with relentless, animalistic precision. Michael wasn't the hunter here. If anything, he felt like prey. Tisk! He clicked his tongue and leapt back as the beast lunged at him. Each exchange drained more of his stamina, more of his essence. He couldn't keep this up. He needed a decisive blow. He knew he had the power to end this fight in a single strike, but to do that, he needed an opening. His gaze flickered to Lily. She was standing at the center of the chamber. Her origin card was floating around her waist, and her eyes burning with a bright violet glow. Michael had no idea what she was thinking. But that didn't matter. He trusted her. She was a seer, after all. She could glimpse 3 to 5 seconds into the future. And in a battle like this, where a single mistake meant death, even a fraction of a second could change everything. Suddenly, her eyes met his. And she nodded. Michael grinned. Then, he charged straight at Subject Omega without a shred of concern for his own safety. The beast screeched and lashed out with all its tentacles. Michael didn't slow down. If anything, he sped up. The tentacles came at him like a storm, slicing through the air with lethal speed. A single misstep, a single hesitation, and he'd be skewered. But he didn't falter. He ducked, twisted, and weaved through the onslaught, his body moving purely on instinct. His blade flashed, severing a few tentacles mid-swing, but more took their place in an instant. Yet, he kept going. Because he trusted Lily. Because the moment she nodded, the path to victory had already been laid out. The future where they would win was set in stone. And then, he saw it too. The beast had committed all of its tentacles to the attack. Michael had dodged or cut through every last one and closed the gap between them. Now, Subject Omega had nothing left to defend itself with aside from its claws and fangs. So, it had to move forward itself. Normally, that would have been a good thing for Michael. Why? Because Subject Omega was absurdly fast. If Michael was charging head-on, he wouldn't have time to evade if the beast did the same. And that's exactly what the beast did. It lunged forward with blurring speed. Or at least, it tried. Right before it could launch itself at Michael, Lily activated a card. Suddenly, thick green vines sprouted from the ground beneath the beast's leg, tearing through the metallic floor and anchoring its foot in place. At the same time, she summoned another support card. Immediately, a shimmering veil of white light enveloped Michael's body, boosting his speed. It wasn't much. The beast shredded through the Vines in an instant and lunged forward, while Michael's speed boost only made him a split second faster. But that split second decided everything. As soon as it stepped into striking range, the beast slashed forward with its claw. But it was just a fraction too late. Michael jumped, landed on the back of its claw, and ran up its twisted arm. The beast barely had time to react before Michael's blade came down with tremendous force. His sword pierced straight through the abomination's skull, carving a gaping hole into its brain. The beast spasmed violently. Its many eyes rolled back, its grotesque limbs convulsing as if refusing to accept its own death. Michael didn't give it a chance to fight back. He twisted the blade and drove it deeper into the beast's skull. Subject Omega let out one last gurgling screech as its body went limp. For a brief moment, silence filled the lab. Then, the beast collapsed. Michael jumped off its toppling body and landed smoothly on the ground, grinning. But there was no time to celebrate. Without missing a beat, he rushed toward Alexia and Kong to assist them. Louis finally joined the battle as well. Subject Alpha was tougher and stronger. But now, it was alone. And there were 4 of them. After 15 grueling minutes, it was over. They had won. Subject Alpha lay motionless in the center of the laboratory. Its grotesque body was sliced and carved in so many places that it looked as if an inexperienced butcher had started skinning it but abandoned the job halfway through. Michael had sustained the most injuries out of all of them since he was fighting on the front line with Alexia. His armor was completely gone, dissipated into light particles, and his longsword was on the verge of breaking as well. It broke his heart. He had brought this sword only recently, and had grown a lot fond of it. This was the first time he used it in a real battle, and it served him well. But now it was as broken as he felt. His left arm was entirely numb, his right ankle throbbed from a mild sprain, and his chest ached every time he took a breath. Kong had dislocated a shoulder, and Louis had survived with only minor cuts, save for the deep gash running across her torso. Alexia, surprisingly, fared better than expected. Her armor was gone too, but the wounds she sustained were not nearly as bad as Michael's. Her left cheek was swollen and one of her knees was scraped. There was also a shallow cut on her back. But that was it. Woo, she cheered while plopping onto the ground. That was exhilarating. I might chase this feeling.